The Gospel of the Lord. It seems very fitting and appropriate that in the context of this week in which we celebrate our nation's independence, that this reading from St. Paul speaks to us of freedom. Freedom is a good thing. John Paul II circled the globe speaking a lot about freedom. And he said that freedom was not the ability to do whatever you want, but rather freedom is the ability to do what is right. So freedom isn't about being able to do whatever you want. Rather, freedom affords us the ability and capacity to do what is right and good. I'm not going to speak about global freedom. I'm going to speak about freedom within the human heart and spirit. I think that's a lot what St. Paul was talking about. He said, for freedom, Christ set us free. And to stand firm and not to submit to the yoke of slavery again. Because I really believe that Jesus wants us to be free, not only from political tyrants, but also free interiorly. But I think, at least in my experience, that many of us don't live in freedom. Rather, many of us live in slavery. What do I mean? What I mean is that we as human beings oftentimes are not rooted in the truth, but rather our life is rooted in a lie. And that the lie becomes for us our personal truth. You might be like, whoa, what are you trying to say there, right? I want to explain this. Every one of us, as we grow up, we have different experiences that form us. And these experiences will allow us to determine what we believe to be true for our lives. And I believe that many of us consider to be true what is a lie. I'd like to explain this. It's kind of complicated. As human beings, we are made up of a complex system of emotions and psychology. And all of us have emotions. And emotions aren't bad. They're not really good. They just are. They're neutral. When we have an experience, it brings up an emotion in us. But emotions do not exist on their own. An emotion has to be connected to a thought in our mind. That is, that emotion has to be interpreted for it to make any sense. And so emotion gets attached to a belief system. And that belief system may or may not really be true. Here's a human example for what I mean. I'm going to make up this example. Let's pretend that there's a 5-year-old boy, and I'm going to call him Mark. Okay? 5-year-old Mark. Mark lives in a home with several siblings where the custom of the home is in the evening, Dad comes home from work, they all clean up, sit down, and they have dinner. That's how it works at Mark's house. On this particular day, Mark's father had a horrible day at work. One of those days where everything seems to go wrong. Have you had one of those days where it's just nothing seems to go right? Dad had a bad day. Dad comes home from work after this bad day. 5-year-old Mark has no idea that Dad has had a bad day. He's just a 5-year-old who's been at home. Dad comes home, they get ready, they wash up, and they're at the dinner table. In the context of dinner, 5-year-old Mark knocks his glass of milk all over the table. 5-year-olds do that, don't they? But for Dad, that was the last straw, I guess. Sometimes we do that. I'm not picking on dads. I'm just using an example, okay? So Dad gets all grumpy and upset. There's all this tension fills the room. Little 5-year-old Mark now has all kinds of feelings going on, doesn't he? He's filled with emotion. He's probably crying. That emotion, though, isn't going to sit on its own. It's going to be interpreted. It needs to be processed. But because Dad in that moment's not going to process that emotion, do that psychology with his son, the 5-year-old's going to do it on his own. And it happens pretty quick. So 5-year-old is going to begin to believe this about himself. So he's going to attach a belief system to that emotion, and here's what he's going to begin to believe. Dad doesn't love me, I'm stupid, and I can't do things right. That's the thought he's going to attach in that moment. It's a real negative feeling. So, Dad doesn't love me, I'm stupid, I can't do things right. All of which are not true, correct? Dad loves Mark very much. Mark's not stupid and helpless. But for Mark, that is true. That's what I meant when I said we believe to be true a lie. That we begin to have what's called a lie-based belief system. That the truth of our life is rooted in a lie. So now Mark believes this about himself, and that belief is connected to an emotion. Now we're going to fast forward 5 more years. Mark is 10 now. He's in the 4th grade. And it's his turn to go up to the front and do a math problem on the whiteboard. You know, we all did that, right, in school? So Mark goes to the front, and he's doing a math problem, and he gets the math problem wrong. And some punk kid in the corner makes a comment and makes fun of him, right? Makes fun of him. All of a sudden, these feelings come up in Mark again, wouldn't they? So these negative feelings come up in him. But those feelings now don't come by themselves, because it's the same feeling he had when he spilled the milk. And that feeling now has a belief system attached to it. So when that feeling comes up, so does his belief system. And it's deep in his consciousness. Might not really be thinking this objectively, but he has this real sense of, nobody likes me, I'm stupid, I can't do things right. He kind of has this sense about himself that that's the truth. So what Mark is going to do is he is going to change his behavior in his life, because if Mark just stays the way he is, no one's going to like him. No one's going to want to be his friend. He's never going to amount to anything, right? Because if I'm just to stay the way I am, who's going to like me? Therefore, I'm going to have to change myself in order to be accepted and liked. Sound familiar? So Mark is going to do things like this. He might become a class clown. Mark might try to excel and become really good at sports. Or he might become really smart, or a combination of all three. Or he becomes the cool guy or the druggie, whatever. But Mark is going to do something, because if he stays the way he is, his life in his mind will be horrible. Because who's going to love him? Because he's not lovable. Because he believes a lie to be true. Now let's fast forward, and Mark is a senior in high school. He's chosen athletics, and he's now at state track and field. He's in the finals, and he gets 2nd place. If you were a parent, would you be proud of your son Mark for getting 2nd place at state? Would you be proud of him? Of course. How does Mark feel about himself? 2nd is just first loser. He's not happy at all. I know Mark really well. I know a Mark like this really well. He's going to spend his life in this reality. And then many of us have had these experiences of growing up where things have happened and we've developed a lie-based belief system. And we don't like that feeling. We don't like that. And so we turn to things to try to take away the pain. That's why people turn to substances and alcohol and things, because we're trying to take away the uncomfortable pain. That's why we do that. We get by ourselves, we feel bored, and these things start to percolate up inside of us, and we don't like it, we get uncomfortable, and so we have to do something to take away the uncomfortableness and the pain. That's what we do as human beings. Enter the good news that Paul is preaching to us. He says, for freedom Christ has set you free. What is he saying? That Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And that if we allow the truth of Christ to come into our lives, then that truth will dispel the lie. We need to have our lives rooted in what is really true and no longer in what is a lie. If the lie in my life gets replaced with the truth, I will be set free. But it's very difficult to open up our lives and to let somebody in to that very vulnerable and dark place in our life where we feel insecure and vulnerable and ashamed. So we just keep that to ourselves and we continue to live in that place. And it becomes like slavery. St. Paul is saying, brothers and sisters, we have to be rooted in Jesus, who is the truth, because there is power in the truth. Jesus is the one who created the universe, and when he spoke, things came to be. He said, let there be light, and there was. Let there be pretty birds, and there was. And so if Jesus speaks truth into our hearts and we're open to that, the lie will disappear, because a lie doesn't have power. It's like darkness and light. Darkness has no power, but light does. So like when you go into your dark living room and you flip the light switch on, the darkness just disappears and the light takes over. There's not a battle between the light and the dark, right? You flip on the light switch and the light's like, and the darkness is like taking it over. It's like an arm wrestle. It doesn't do that. Darkness is just gone because darkness has no power. Light has power. Lie has no power. Truth has power. And when we allow the truth of Christ into the place of our lives where there is lie, it disappears. And if that lie is gone, also that emotion goes with it. And we're free from that. Brothers and sisters, my guess is that all of us have had experiences similar to Mark. And our behaviors are affected because we live out of this place not of freedom, but of slavery. And Jesus wants to set us free from that. And my guess is some of you have experienced that kind of freedom. Have you ever gone to a retreat or even like a counseling session where for the first time in your life, you opened your heart and said something that you've never told somebody before? You said something very sacred to yourself, very intimate and vulnerable and painful, and you shared that with somebody, and like you felt this weight lifted from your shoulders. Have you had that experience? It's because when we bring these things into the light, we begin to experience freedom. This lie is removed, and we have this freedom. We feel at peace. It's wonderful. But most of us are too afraid to do that. And so St. Paul is saying, if we lived in the Spirit of God, if we let the Holy Spirit live in our lives and we lived in truth, we would live in freedom. We wouldn't be afraid of being who we are, children of God. But no, we don't believe that, do we? Do I really believe that I'm a beloved child of God? Do I really believe that? Thus, the most repeated phrase by God in the Scriptures is, do not be afraid. But there's a real fear in freedom.